Hello guys and welcome. Tonight, I invite you to settle in comfortably, close your eyes, and imagine yourself traveling back in time. We are going on a gentle journey together, far back to a quiet village in medieval Europe around the early 1300s. This is a safe, calm space to explore history. The only thing you need to do is relax and listen to the soft tale of another time. If you enjoy these peaceful historical stories, feel free to gently tap the like button and consider subscribing for more. Now, take a slow deep breath and let's begin our story. Imagine it's just before dawn on a clear morning many centuries ago. The world is still and dim. Above, a few stars still shimmer faintly in the sky. In the east, the first pale light of day is beginning to glow. You find yourself standing at the edge of a small village. It's a medieval village of simple wooden huts with thatched roofs, surrounded by dark fields and dense woods beyond. The air is cool and damp with dew. There is a gentle mist clinging to the ground, and everything is quiet and hushed. In this calm silence, you can hear the soft sounds of the village beginning to stir. A rooster crows somewhere, its call low and distant. A dog barks once and then falls silent. Inside one of the little huts nearby, you sense movement as people start to wake from their sleep. These people are medieval peasants, common folk who live off the land. Tonight we will spend time with them, observing their daily life, their struggles and small joys, and coming to understand why it was so very hard to be a peasant in these long ago days. Picture a humble cottage, just a few yards from where you stand. Its walls are made of wattle and daub, a lattice of woven twigs plastered over with mud and straw. The roof is thickly thatched with dried reeds. There is a single door, wooden and plain, and perhaps one small window covered with old cloth, not glass. Through cracks in the walls, a faint orange glow is visible. The hearth inside has been kept smouldering through the night. Thin tendrils of smoke seep out from the thatch, carrying the scent of wood. There is no chimney in this house, only a hole in the roof, or a simple vent, so the smoke from last night's fire lingers inside, soaking into the thatch and leaving the air acrid. Now you hear soft voices from within as the family awakens. Imagine that inside this tiny one-room hut lives a family of peasants, perhaps a husband and wife, and their children bundled under woolen blankets. Maybe an elderly parent or a young relative sleeps there as well. The space is cramped and everyone shares it. Along one wall, you might see a few low wooden stools and a rough table. In the dim corner, there are sacks of grain stored for bread, and hanging from the rafters are bundles of dried herbs and some onions. There is a simple loom for weaving cloth, a small upright frame loom set against the wall, and a spindle and distaff for spinning wool. In another corner, a couple of chickens rest in a wicker basket. They were brought in for the night to keep them safe from foxes. A faint squeaking noise reveals a few mice scurrying under the straw on the floor, searching for crumbs. This is a poor home, but it is typical of a medieval peasant's lot. Before the sun even rises, the peasant family begins their day. You can imagine the father, a sturdy man with rough, sun-browned skin, sitting up from his straw-filled mattress. Heber rubs his eyes and reaches for his tunic and hose that hang on a peg. The mother, wrapped in a faded wool shawl, is already stirring the embers in the hearth to rekindle the fire for the morning meal. The children, still drowsy, huddle together for warmth for a few more moments as the adults start the daily tasks. In the dimness, the interior of the cottage is illuminated only by the weak glow of the fire, and maybe a little clay oil lamp, if they can spare the oil. The walls are darkened from years of smoke. There is a faint smell of last night's stew still in the air, mixed with the earthy scent of damp dirt floors and the tang of soot. The family's breaths cloud faintly in the chilly morning air inside the hut, because even indoors it is cold. The fire had died down overnight. The mother takes a clay pot and scoops some water from a wooden bucket. The water was drawn from a stream the day before and is murky with a bit of sediment. She pours it into an iron cauldron hanging over the hearth. She is preparing to make a thin porridge or pottage for breakfast, a simple soup of oats and perhaps a few peas or beans, flavored with a little onion and parsley from the kitchen garden outside. There is no luxury in this meal. It's the same thing they eat most mornings, a warm bowl of bland porridge to fill their bellies and give them energy for the hard work to come. As the fire crackles gently and the porridge begins to simmer, the father pulls on his rough woolen tunic. It's a plain garment, undyed and homespun, a sort of long shirt that falls to his knees. Over it he ties a simple leather belt. His legs are covered with woolen hose, like long stockings that reach up to his thighs. They have been mended many times by his wife's careful hands. On his feet, if he chooses, he might wear leather shoes, but often he goes barefoot inside, or when the weather is mild. His feet are tough and calloused from years of going without shoes in the fields. For now, he leaves the shoes off to warm his toes by the fire a moment while he helps the mother with the morning chores. The children awaken fully now, yawning and stretching. The eldest, a boy of perhaps 10 years, reaches for his little sister's hand to comfort her as she shivers. They too dress in simple clothes, coarse linen shirts and woolen tunics like their parents, cut down or patched together from old garments. The boy's tunic is actually an old one of his father's, the hem raised and sleeves shortened to fit his smaller frame. Clothes are precious. A family typically owns only a couple of sets of clothing each, so everything is handed down and repaired repeatedly. The little girl's dress is of brown wool that has faded and felted over time, and beneath it she wears a linen shift that was once white but now is greyish from many washings in the stream. Once dressed, the children set to small tasks. The boy takes the firewood basket and steps outside into the cool dawn to fetch a few more sticks to keep the fire strong. The door of the hut creaks open, and you can see him briefly, a thin child with unkempt brown hair, his face still soft, but with a seriousness beyond his years. He has known work and responsibility from the time he could walk. Outside, he pauses to breathe in the morning air, seeing the faint pink of sunrise beginning to color the horizon. Perhaps he glances towards the fields where he knows he will spend the day working alongside his father. I think he wants his father. The grass is wet with dew under his bare feet. In the hedgerow beyond the yard, a few early birds are already fluttering. The morning air is growing lighter and reveals the simple beauty around him. Wildflowers at the edges of the track sway gently, little red poppies and blue cornflowers adding tiny touches of color to the green, damp grass. The drone of waking bees and the chirp of a cricket, hidden in the brush, become audible as the world stirs. He notices a lark taken to the sky, pouring out a bright, looping song from high above. Even amid the family's daily toil, the natural world offers moments of gentle serenity that a weary soul might quietly appreciate, if only for a heartbeat. The boy returns with an armful of kindling and a couple of larger logs. Meanwhile, the mother has ladled the now cooked porridge into wooden bowls. The family gathers around their small table, or perhaps they simply sit on stools near the warm hearth if the table is too small. They bow their heads for a moment in a silent blessing. They are devout in their simple way, and they thank God for this meager food. Each person eats a scoop of the thick porridge. It is not rich or hearty by any means. The grains are coarse and the flavor plain. On special days, they might sweeten porridge with a bit of honey or milk, but not today. Milk is scarce because their one cow must feed her calf, and whatever surplus milk she gives is carefully saved to make a little cheese or butter on occasion. Honey is a luxury they seldom have, so this morning it's plain oats and beans, with a pinch of salt. The warmth of the bowl is comforting in their hands, especially as they blow on each spoonful to cool it. The youngest child makes a face at the bland taste, as children do, but her mother smiles softly and encourages her to eat up. They all need their strength. As they eat quietly, the light grows. Through the open door, now left slightly ajar for some fresh air despite the chill, a dim golden glow creeps in. The village around them is waking up too. You can imagine other families in other huts going through similar motions, stirring fires, feeding children, perhaps a cough here or a murmur of conversation carrying on the still air. Thin columns of smoke begin to rise from a few rooftops as one by one hearth fires are stoked back to life for the day's cooking. A few more roosters crow, more insistently now, echoing each other from different corners of the hamlet. The father finishes his bowl and stands, rolling his shoulders as if to loosen muscles still stiff from a short night's sleep. Perhaps he spent yesterday in the Lord's fields doing heavy labor and did not get enough rest. He sets the bowl down and picks up a woolen hood to cover his head. It's a simple cowl that also drapes over his shoulders like a short cape, protecting him from the morning chill. The mother hands him a chunk of coarse bread she saved from yesterday's baking and a small piece of hard cheese wrapped in a cloth. This will be his midday meal later. He thanks her softly. Now it is time for the family to part ways for the morning. The father and the older boy will go out to the fields. The mother will remain near her home, tending to the younger children and carrying out her own work around the house and yard. But her tasks are no less important or strenuous. She will be laboring all day as well, in different ways. The parents exchange a few quiet words. Maybe they discuss which field the father will work in today, or remind the boy to stay focused and listen to his father's guidance. The mother might mention something about needing to gather firewood or spin yarn, and the father nods, knowing each of them has their burdens. The little girl clings to her father's leg for a moment, and he pats her head reassuringly. Stepping outside, you feel the world fully coming alive. The sun has edged above the horizon now, a pale disk beginning to shine through the morning mist. Dewdrops on the grass and thatch glisten in that new light. The village consists of a handful of huts like the one we just left, maybe a dozen in total, spread along a rutted dirt path. There is a small stone church at one end of the village, its modest bell tower and wooden cross visible above the trees. At the other end, slightly apart from the peasant homes, is a larger house, still simple but sturdier. This is the manor house, or the home of the local lord's steward. It's not a grand castle or palace, just a stone and timber hall where the lord, if he is ever in residence, or his appointed overseer stays when conducting local business. The real lord of these lands, a nobleman, might not live here year-round. He could be off in a distant castle or at the king's court, leaving the daily running of the village to his officials, but his presence is felt everywhere through the system of obligations and laws that govern this village. As you watch, the father and son begin their walk towards the fields, carrying their simple tools. The father hoists a wooden plough beam over his shoulder. The plough's iron blade and wooden body are kept out in the fields or a shed near them, but he carries the yoke or beam. The boy carries a hoe for breaking up clods, and perhaps a sack with seed if it is planting season, or a scythe if it is harvest time. Let us imagine it is springtime, the season of renewal and hard work to prepare the land. The trees are budding and the chill in the air will soon give way to a gentle warmth as the sun climbs higher. They pass by a neighbour's cottage and another man joins them, falling into step. This neighbour is also heading to the fields. He too is a peasant, and like most others here, he must work not only on his own small patch of land, but also on the Lord's land a certain number of days each week. This is part of the feudal bargain. In exchange for being allowed to farm a few strips of land for themselves, the peasants owe labour to their lord. In this village, perhaps each family must work 3 days a week on the Lord's demes, the large fields whose produce goes directly to the Lord's household. During planting and harvest seasons, the obligation might increase. The Lord might demand extra days of work, called boon days, when all hands must help bring in the Lord's crops. The village might even include a few freemen, peasants who are not bound to labour service, but instead pay a fixed rent to the Lord. But by and large, families like ours are unfree villains. They cannot simply ignore the Lord's work. By law and custom, they must fulfill these duties under threat of fines or worse. It doesn't matter if the peasants have their own fields that urgently need tending at the same moment. The Lord's work comes first, as decreed by manorial custom and enforced by the manor court. Much of the hardship of peasant life is this constant labour for others on top of labour for themselves. The men speak softly as they walk. They might be discussing the tasks of the day. One mentions that the ploughing of the west field must be finished by today because barley seeds need to go in before the next rain. Another nods and perhaps sighs, thinking of the long furrows waiting to be turned. They all know that a successful crop is literally a matter of life and death. If they don't plow and sow in time, the harvest will be poor and their families could face hunger. Soon they reach the fields. Looking over the landscape, you see a patchwork of open fields divided into long, narrow strips. There are no neat hedges or fences between individual plots. This is the open field system. Each peasant household has a few strips of land scattered in different fields around the village. One strip here might grow wheat, another over there might be for barley or rye, another lying fallow this year to recover. The reason their land is in strips, intermingled with their neighbours, is to share both good and bad land fairly. Everyone gets some fertile ground and some poorer ground, rather than one family hogging all the best soil. It's a communal way of farming that requires cooperation. Everyone must sow and harvest at roughly the same times, and they often share resources like ploughs and oxen teams, because owning draft animals is very costly. In one corner of the fields, a team of oxen stands ready, hitched to a heavy plough. Oxen are the great beasts of burden on the medieval farm. Here we have two large, slow-moving oxen with broad shoulders and gentle eyes, their breath steaming in the cool morning. They belong to the Lord's estate, but the villagers have the use of them for ploughing their own fields too, as long as they fulfill their labor obligation. Sometimes several peasant families jointly own an ox or two, sharing the animal because no single family can afford to feed and keep an ox year-round on its own. An ox eats a lot of hay and needs pasture. It's almost like owning a tractor in terms of investment, and a huge animal like this is beyond the means of many peasants. With oxen to pull the plough, however, the heavy work of turning the soil becomes possible. A single man could never dig the acres needed with a spade alone. He relies on these strong creatures. The father from our cottage and his neighbor approach the steward, or perhaps the village reeve, who oversees the field work. The reeve is a local peasant appointed to organize the manor's agriculture. He might be chosen by the lord or elected by the villagers each year. Usually it's one of the more experienced or literate peasants. This man carries a staff as a badge of his office, and he's in charge of making sure everyone does their required labor. This morning, he greets the men curtly and points them to where the plough team is waiting. The reeve reminds them which field they are to plough today for the Lord. He also notes who has or hasn't shown up. If someone is missing without leave, that person could be fined by the manor court for failing to perform service. Without further delay, the men get to work. The father takes hold of the plough's wooden handles, guiding the iron ploughshare into the earth. His neighbor leads the oxen by a rope, clicking his tongue and calling out low commands to urge them forward. The oxen lean into the yoke, their massive flanks bunching with effort, and the plough begins to cut a furrow through the moist soil. The earth smells fresh and rich as it is turned over, dark brown ribbons of dirt flipping to the side. It is heavy labor. The father must strain to keep the plough at the right depth while stumbling over clods and roots. His boots, which he put on just for this task, sink into the soft ground, quickly becoming caked in mud. After just a short time, his arms and back feel the ache from resisting the jolts of the plough, hitting stones hidden beneath the soil. But he and the others press on, steadily, step by step across the field. Meanwhile, the sun climbs higher, beginning to burn off the morning mist. Birds start to sing more brightly in the hedgerows that line the fields. Other peasants are out scattering seeds on a plot that was ploughed yesterday. A group of women and younger children follow behind them, shooing away crows that try to steal the seeds. One boy runs around waving his arms and yelling to startle the blackbirds that gather whenever humans aren't looking, hoping to eat the precious grain newly sown in the furrows. The women use rakes to lightly cover the seeds with soil, patting it down with their feet. If it were harvest season instead of spring, you would see a different scene here. Men and women side by side, swinging sickles to cut the tall wheat or barley, bundling the stalks into sheaves. Older children might be gathering those bundles and stacking them upright to dry. The air in late summer would be full of the sound of scythes swishing and the rustle of stalks, and people calling out to each other to coordinate their efforts. Harvest is the most intense time of all. They work from dawn to dusk and often well into twilight under a glowing orange sky, racing to bring the crops in before an unexpected rain might spoil them. They have seen it happen, an entire year's hard work ruined in an afternoon by a freak storm. Not long ago, a terrible hailstorm struck just on the eve of harvest, pounding the golden wheat into the mud. The villagers tried to save what they could, but much was lost. That winter was lean and taught them never to take a bounty for granted until it was safely stored. There are other dangers too. A sudden flood from heavy autumn rains can wash away stacked hay or drown livestock, and a late spring frost can kill the young shoots in the ground. Always, they live with an undercurrent of anxiety that nature's whims may undo their careful planning. It is why, as they labor, they often murmur prayers for good weather to whichever saint might listen. During harvest time, the Lord's demands take priority. First, they must harvest the Lord's fields. Only after that can they harvest their own little plots of grain. It's a frantic race, because any delay or storm could ruin their year's food supply. We can easily imagine their tension. Each morning at harvest, they scan the sky for any sign of dark clouds with worried eyes. When the harvest finally ends, there is an immense collective sigh of relief. But let's return to our spring day and the ploughing. As the morning wears on, the peasant father and his companions methodically plough one furrow after another. By mid-morning, they have to stop and let the oxen rest for a few minutes. The animals stand patiently, sides heaving, as the men wipe sweat from their brows. The oxen chew their cud placidly as they pause, swishing their tails. The men stretch their backs, some taking a swig of weak ale from leather flasks they carry. The ale is home brewed and low in alcohol, but it refreshes them and gives a bit of energy. Ale is the everyday drink for peasants. Water, straight from streams, is often unsafe, can carry disease. So they brew grain into ale, which through fermentation kills many germs and provides some nourishment. Even children drink a very weak ale, sometimes called small beer. Everyone from baby to elder is accustomed to the taste of slightly sour, nutty barley brew. As they resume work, the sun now is shining brightly. The fields and village are fully illuminated in the clear morning light. You might notice that the peasants move with a certain rhythm, a steady pace born of long practice and necessity. They cannot afford to tire out too quickly. The day is long and filled with labor, so they pace themselves, taking short breather moments when they reach the end of a furrow, for instance. Perhaps as he guides the plough, the father hums a simple tune under his breath or recites a prayer for strength. Many medieval peasants are deeply religious and often punctuate their day with little prayers or invocations to saints. A farmer might briefly pray to Saint Isidore, the patron saint of labourers, or perhaps to Saint Fiacre, another saint associated with growing things, whenever he begins a new field, hoping for divine blessing on the work of his hands. These prayers comfort them, making them feel that God or the saints are helping with the heavy work in the fields, while the men toil in the Lord's fields. Let us turn our gaze back to the village, where the women are busy with their own morning tasks. The mother we saw earlier has finished tidying the hut after the family's breakfast. She sent her eldest son off with her husband. Now she has the younger child to mind. Her toddler daughter clings to her skirts as she steps outside into the daylight. The little girl, perhaps 4 years old, is barefoot and curious, trying to follow her mother around. The mother smiles and places a hand on her daughter's light hair, gently guiding her to sit and play with a small doll made of rags. There are daily chores the mother must accomplish, and many of them are physically demanding in their own way. She lifts the empty water bucket from beside the door and balances it on her hip. Along with another woman from a neighboring hut, she walks to the village well, or stream. If there is a well in the village, it's likely just a shallow communal well lined with stones, and the water might be brackish. If a stream is the water source, it could be a bit of a walk outside the village. In our village, let's imagine there is a clear stream running not too far beyond the church. The women tread the familiar path, the cool morning now beginning to warm under the rising sun. They talk quietly about household matters as they go. Perhaps one mentions her hope that her cow will calve healthy this spring. Another laments that a fox came in the night and stole one of her chickens last week. At the stream, the water runs fresh, but not entirely clean. Upstream, someone might be washing laundry or filling a trough for animals, and people sometimes bathe or even empty waste upstream. So the water should ideally be boiled before drinking. But for washing clothes or dishes, it will do as is. The mother fills her bucket, grunting softly as she heaves the now heavy load. Balanced expertly on her head or hip, the bucket might weigh 20 or 30 pounds when full. She will carry it all the way back to the house without spilling much, a skill she learned young by watching her own mother. The other woman fills her own container and they head back together. Now, that sounds like a bad tale. Once home, our mother sets the water down by the door with a sigh of relief. She then takes a moment to knead some dough that she had set to rise at dawn. Each week, usually on a designated day, the village women bake bread. Often they must use the Lord's mill to grind their grain into flour, and the Lord charges a fee, some portion of the grain, for this service. The heavy millstone is located in a mill by the stream, turned by water or by a draft animal. Because of the fee, some peasants secretly keep small hand mills called querns to grind a little flour themselves at home. But this is against the law on many manors, because the Lord wants all grain milled at his mill. Still, a small hand quern is sometimes used quietly at home to avoid the mill fee for small amounts of grain, even though doing so could result in a fine if discovered. After grinding one way or another, they mix the flour with water and a bit of sourdough starter or yeast from the previous batch and let it rise. Now the mother has a lump of coarse dough made from rye, and barley flour is too expensive or reserved for the Lord's own bread. Her bread will be brown, dense and filling. She shapes it into rough rounds. There is a community bread oven near the green, but they can't fire it every day. Usually they bake once or twice a week. Sometimes they also bake flat bread on a hot stone at home or in the ashes of the hearth if an oven isn't available for each household. Using the communal oven might cost a small fee to the Lord or to the village baker if one is appointed. On this day, perhaps it's her turn to use the oven in the afternoon, so she prepares the loaves and sets them aside under a cloth to rise a bit more. Meanwhile, she has many other things to do. The wool shearing season is in spring, so soon they will shear their sheep, if her family has any, and she will begin processing the wool. But even before that, there is wool from last year that still needs carding and spinning. Cloth making is an endless task. Most peasants wear woolen clothing, and it is generally the women's work to turn raw fleece into yarn and then into fabric. You can see her now sitting on a low stool just outside her cottage, the sunlight falling gently on her lap as she picks up a clump of washed wool and begins to card it. She uses 2 flat paddles with teeth, like wire brushes, to comb and straighten the fibers. Once they are aligned into a fluffy wad, she attaches a tuft to a drop spindle and starts spinning. The spindle is a weighted stick that she twirls, drawing out the wool fibers into a long, thin thread. She spins methodically, feeding the wool and twisting it into yarn. It is almost meditative, this repetitive motion, and she might hum a hymn or a folk tune as she works, in time with the soft whir of the spindle. Her little daughter watches for a while, then toddles off to chase a butterfly, fluttering near some wildflowers by the road. The mother glances up regularly to keep an eye on the child, but she is used to multitasking like this. The other woman who fetched water with her has now settled nearby, perhaps also with some mending or spinning, and they chat quietly as they work, discussing whose cow is due to calf or how the planting is going for their husbands. This social aspect of work makes it more bearable. They can share little bits of news or gossip, who in the village is ill, whose daughter might marry next summer, the antics of the priest's new young hound that was seen chasing a goose yesterday. Besides spinning, the mother also needs to consider other tasks for the day. Perhaps she must gather some wild greens or herbs from the woods for the pot, or collect eggs if the hens laid any, or patch her son's tunic, which got a tear. There is also the matter of gleaning, or gathering whatever nature provides, freely. In summer and fall, women and children often go out after the harvest to glean leftover grains from the field. The stalks and ears that the reapers missed is allowed by tradition, as a form of charity. Those scattered bits can add up to extra food for the family. Other times, they gather berries, nuts, and mushrooms from the edges of the forest. You can imagine our peasant mother in autumn walking with a basket along a hedgerow, her daughter skipping by her side as they pick blackberries and hazelnuts. These are small, seasonal treats that supplement the monotonous diet of bread and pottage. But in spring, there are fresh greens, nettles, dandelion leaves, wild leeks. She might send the older children to collect these to add vitamins to their meals after the sparse winter. Back in the fields, the father and the other men have been working steadily. By late morning, as the sun nears its highest point, they are finishing up the portion of ploughing assigned to them on the Lord's land. Perhaps they've managed to plough several acres by working together with the team of oxen. Their stomachs begin to rumble. They've been working for hours on that thin porridge from dawn. They're hungry and tired. The father's back aches. The neighbor's hands are blistered from guiding the rough plough rope and pressing down on the plough. The field they've ploughed looks good though. Neat, brown furrows ready to receive seed. They decide to break for their midday meal. Typically, medieval peasants have a break around noon for dinner, which is actually their main meal of the day. The evening meal is lighter and called supper. The father and his neighbor find a spot of shade at the edge of the field, perhaps under a small oak tree or by a hedgerow, to sit and rest. They drop their tools and ease themselves down on the grass with groans of relief. The father unties the cloth bundle his wife gave him. Inside is the chunk of dark bread and the piece of hard cheese. The bread was baked a couple of days ago. It's tough and chewy, but he is thankful to have it. He uses his eating knife, everyone carries a simple belt knife for eating and work, to cut a piece of bread and cheese. The cheese is sharp and a bit sour, likely made from skim milk left over after butter making, formed into a small round that has hardened over the past weeks. Still, it provides some fat and protein. As he eats, he might also have an onion or a handful of chives to add a bit of flavor, which he pulls from his pocket. Raw onions are strong, but peasants often eat them with bread and cheese. If he's lucky, there might be a few salt crystals wrapped in a scrap of cloth. Precious salt that he uses sparingly to sprinkle on the onion. Salt is precious because it's expensive, it has to be bought or traded for, and it's vital for preserving food, so they use it carefully. The two men share a bit of conversation as they eat. Perhaps they talk about the work still left to do in the afternoon, or share worries about the coming season. One might quietly mention that his younger child has been ill with a fever for a few days and he hopes it's not serious. There are many illnesses that strike families in these times. Fevers, poxes, infections that we today would consider minor but can be deadly without effective medicine. And the other man nods with sympathy, recalling how last year his infant son died after a coughing sickness in winter. Child mortality is heartbreakingly common. Many families have to bury infants and young children, and those who survive past early childhood are still at risk from diseases like dysentery or tuberculosis. Although it happens often, each loss is a heavy sorrow, and yet it is so frequent that it becomes an accepted part of life's pattern. The parents grieve, but they must carry on for the others who live. Contrary to some modern ideas, medieval parents deeply loved their children and mourned them when they died. Repeated grief did not make them indifferent, though it did teach them that life is fragile, and they knew that fragility intimately. In such uncertainty, the peasants often placed their hope in God and the saints for solace and aid. If illness struck, they would pray fervently for deliverance. A mother cradling a feverish baby might promise that if the child survived, she would undertake a pilgrimage to a holy shrine in gratitude. These journeys of faith, though difficult, were a source of great comfort. Perhaps that father's wife, after their sick little one recovered, did travel to a nearby abbey where a famous healing relic was kept. She may have walked for days, joining other humble pilgrims on the road, carrying a walking staff and a rosary, enduring blisters and rain out of devotion. Upon reaching the shrine, let's say it was dedicated to the Virgin Mary or to a beloved saint, she lit a candle and knelt in tearful thanks, touching the relic, maybe a fragment of a saint's bone or a vial of sacred oil, and believing in her heart that divine grace saved her child. She might return home with a lead pilgrim's badge pinned to her shawl, a token of the journey that she will cherish and show others. Back in the village, her tale of the pilgrimage, of distant towns, kind monks who gave her bread, the inspiring sight of a great cathedral, brings a spark of wonder to her neighbors' eyes. Even those who could not travel far experienced the sacred through the relics and itinerant holy men that occasionally came by. Perhaps once a year, a traveling friar or pardoner arrives in the village, displaying relics to the faithful. He might hold up a golden monstrance said to contain a splinter of the true cross, or a reliquary with what he claims is a saint's tooth. The villagers, awed and hopeful, line up to bow and touch the relic gently, then cross themselves. In that moment, standing barefoot on the church's stone floor before a sliver of something holy, the hardships of daily life seem to recede. The people feel connected to a protective heavenly power. They murmur prayers for healing and safe harvests as the friar blesses them with the relic. Such encounters with the divine, through pilgrimage or relic, add a layer of meaning to peasant life. They believe strongly that their patron saints watch over them. When they labor in the fields or suffer illness, they are not truly alone. They feel the presence of holy helpers whom they honor in church and in daily prayers. And yeah, you're right. Yeah, Dr. Heritage in his teens, and they feel the presence of holy helpers whom they honor in church and in daily prayers. This faith does not make the physical burdens lighter, but it lightens the heart, giving them the strength to push on, convinced that after all the toil and sorrow, a reward awaits in heaven, or at least some comfort from above in this life. After finishing their simple meal, the father takes a moment to lie back on the grass and gaze at the sky. The clouds drift lazily above, white against the deepening blue. For just a short while, he allows himself to rest. His eyelids feel heavy, perhaps he even dozes for a minute or two, the distant bird song and the gentle swish of a breeze through young leaves lulling him. Brief moments of rest like this are precious in a life of toil. His neighbor might be chewing on a straw and gazing at nothing in particular, grateful for the brief respite. But soon, the rest period is over. The reeve, or steward, may come around and clap his hands or call out to everyone to get back to work. If it's a particularly busy time, like planting, they can't afford more than a half-hour break. The father pushes himself up, groaning slightly as he rises to his feet. He and the boy, and the neighbor too, must now continue with the afternoon's tasks. The duty for the latter part of the day may be different. Having finished the Lord's ploughing quota in the morning, perhaps now the father has permission to work on his own strips of land for a little while. Or perhaps the entire day was dedicated to the Lord's fields, and his own must wait. It could be that on certain days, all work belongs to the Lord, and on others, the peasants tend their own crops. For our story, let's imagine that after lunch, he will spend a couple of hours on some communal tasks that benefit the village, and thus the Lord as a whole. Not far from where they ploughed, there is a hedge surrounding the common pasture that needs mending. The morning's team now heads there. The Lord's sheep and the villagers' few livestock graze in that pasture, and maintaining the fences and hedges is vital so that animals don't wander into the crops. The village hayward, an official who looks after hedges and enclosures, has noticed a section of fence that was trampled, perhaps by a wandering cow or a deer. So a peasant father, his neighbor, and a couple of others begin gathering fresh branches of hawthorn to weave into the hedge and sharpening stakes to reinforce it. It's a slightly lighter task than ploughing, but still requires strength to hammer stakes and drag thorny branches. The sun is high and hot now in early afternoon, and sweat beads on their brows again. They pause occasionally to wipe their faces with their sleeves, leaving streaks of dust. Their minds might wander a bit as they do this relatively monotonous chore. Perhaps our peasant thinks about the coming church holiday of Easter and hopes to have a little meat for the celebration, or he reflects on the rumor he heard that the Lord of the Manor might impose a new tax this year to fund some war. A worrying prospect. Lords can demand extra payments, called tallages, from their serfs when they need money for, say, a journey or a conflict. Such news spreads anxiety in the village, as coins are extremely scarce in peasant households. Most rents and dues are paid in kind: grain, eggs, produce. Because peasants seldom see actual money. Only occasionally might they earn a few pennies by selling surplus produce at a market or by a bit of hired work. So a new monetary tax would mean a family might have to sell a pig or their one cow to raise the sum, or else face punishment. The father furrows his brow at that thought, then shakes it off. There's nothing he can do about the Lord's decisions, and right now the hedge needs fixing. With some grunting effort, they drive the final stakes and weave the last brambles into place. The fence is repaired. Stepping back, the men wipe their hands. It's hot, so they take a swig of water from a leather flask, water, not ale, because one of them refilled it at the stream during lunch. They can't spare ale for every break. Elsewhere in the fields, others have finished their assigned tasks too. Over in the pasture, a young girl has been watching the community's geese nibble on the grass. Keeping them together and safe from foxes is her task today. She now shoes and herds the honking geese back toward the village pen as evening approaches. Similarly, an older man who serves as the village shepherd is bringing the sheep back in. The animals are often kept in enclosed pens or folds at night to prevent predators or thieves from taking them. If the village has a common shepherd, each family that owns sheep likely pays him a little or gives him some wool or a lamb in payment for tending the flock during the day. It's an example of how communal life is organized. Almost nothing is done completely alone. Survival often depends on sharing resources and dividing labor. One man might herd sheep for everyone. Another perhaps acts as swineherd for the village pigs in the oak woods. A woman with brewing skill might make ale for all from each household's grain under agreed terms. There is a strong sense of interdependence among the peasants. They are all in the same boat, under the same lord, facing the same struggles. The father and son trudge back along the dusty road toward their home. Their clothes are smeared with dirt and sweat. The boy's hair is plastered to his forehead. His cheeks are flushed from the heat and work. He is exhausted and hungry again, looking forward to supper. As they near the hut, the smell of cooking greets them, bringing instant relief to their minds. The mother has been preparing the evening meal. She might have started a pottage earlier in the afternoon, using water, a handful of barley or oats, and whatever vegetables she had on hand, perhaps those green onions and herbs she picked, maybe some dried peas or a few strips of cabbage. If they have a bit of salted meat or a scrap of bacon, she would have added it to lend some flavor to the stew. Meat is scarce in their diet. They rarely slaughter their animals because those animals are more valuable alive. A cow gives milk, a hen lays eggs, a sheep provides wool. Usually meat is only eaten if an animal is very old or injured, or on special occasions, or perhaps they might catch some small wild animals or fish if permitted. So on an ordinary day like today, their pottage is lightly vegetarian, or with just a hint of meat for taste. Tonight there might be no meat at all, but the mother has a surprise. She managed to gather some wild mushrooms in the woods earlier and toss them into the pot. Their savory flavor will be a welcome addition. She also found a few tender nettle greens and added them. Once boiled, they lose their sting and add nutrition to the soup. The cauldron simmers gently over the hearth and she stirs it with a wooden spoon, adding a pinch of salt, not too much, and tasting to see if the peas have softened. The rich smell of cooking fills the hut, overcoming the usual mustiness. In one corner of the hearth, she bakes a flat cake of barley dough from the batch she kneaded that morning. She simply plasters the dough on a heated flat stone among the coals. It won't rise like the leavened bread in the communal oven, but it will become a warm, edible flatbread to accompany the soup. When the father enters the hut, he is greeted by the warmth of the fire and the thick, earthy aroma of stew. The space inside is dim now as the sun is lowering. It's flickering amber on the walls. Dust motes dance in the air above the hearth's glow. The little toddler runs to her father, babbling excitedly about her day in words only her family understands. He picks her up with a tired smile and kisses her rosy cheek, then sets her down to untie his muddy shoes. The mother ladles the pottage into wooden bowls or hollowed-out trenchers, stale pieces of bread used as plates. The older boy practically collapses onto a stool, exhausted but relieved to be home and smelling food. Before they eat, the mother quietly says a blessing, thanking God for the food and asking for continued protection. Though it is meager, they are thankful to have something warm to fill their bellies. Each family member receives their portion. The father and mother let the children have slightly more if there isn't quite enough to go around, a common parental sacrifice. They blow on the hot pottage and begin to eat with wooden spoons. It is thick and porridge-like, with peas and bits of onion and greens. The mushrooms have cooked down into the broth, giving it a richer taste than usual. The fresh barley flatbread is a treat, even though it's coarse and dense. They use it to scoop the stew or soak up the broth. As they eat, the toddler slurps happily, and the boy, now re-energized by the food, excitedly tells his mother about how the oxen pulled the plow and how he saw a hare in the field. The father chimes in with gentle corrections or adds details, and the mother listens with a proud and attentive smile. Outside, dusk is settling over the village. A few neighbors pass by on the road, perhaps finishing up their own chores, and they call a good evening greeting. Within the cottage, the fire and a simple oil lamp or rushlight provide a dim, flickering illumination. The mother takes a bit of tallow, animal fat, and refills the clay lamp, floating a small rush wick in it. This will give them an hour or two of weak light. Such lamps and candles are a luxury of sorts. Many peasants just go to bed when it gets dark to save on fuel. But tonight, there are small tasks to finish and perhaps a desire to unwind, so they keep a little flame going. After supper, the family settles in for the evening. In the close darkness outside their door, crickets chirp in the grass and frogs croak by the stream, providing a calming night music. Inside, bellies are fuller than at dawn, and the weariness of the day's work begins to set in heavily. The father leans against the wall on a straw mat, stretching his sore legs toward the warmth of the hearth. The mother picks up her spindle again. Even now, to spin a bit more wool by firelight, she feels she must keep her hands busy, as there is always a need for more yarn. The older boy, now that he's eaten, finds a second wind and plays quietly with his little sister. He has carved a small toy for her from a scrap of wood, shaping it into a rough figure of a horse on wheels. He pulls it with a string and she toddles after it, giggling. Such simple, homemade toys and games are their entertainment. They have no books. The family is illiterate, except perhaps the priest taught the boy a few letters in Latin if he visited the church school briefly. Certainly they have no devices or diversions beyond what they create themselves. Storytelling, songs, and little games are the main amusements when work is done. Perhaps tonight the father is in the mood to tell a story. Many medieval peasants passed down folklore and local legends orally. He might tell his children a fable about clever animals, or perhaps a biblical story he heard at church, but now recounts in their own language with a simple, homespun flair. Maybe he speaks of David and Goliath, the boy who, with God's help, defeated a giant, which might inspire a peasant child to believe that even the small and weak can overcome the mighty, a comforting thought in a world where they themselves are the small and the mighty, can seem like giants. Or he recounts a tale of a wandering saint who performed miracles of healing, teaching the moral of faith and kindness. His voice is low and steady, a familiar, soothing sound in the dimness. The children listen with rapt attention, eyes shining in the firelight. The little girl eventually climbs into her mother's lap, sucking her thumb sleepily as she listens to her father's deep voice rumbling softly. The mother continues to spin, nodding at key parts of the story, and occasionally the boy interjects with an excited question. He wants to know more, to picture the scenes in his mind. The father chuckles and answers, happy to educate his children in this gentle way, even if he has no formal schooling himself beyond what the priest preaches. Outside, a chill night wind blows against the walls. The thatch roof rustles quietly. Somewhere not far off, a cow lows in a byre and another answers. The village settles to sleep, humans and animals alike winding down. The darkness deepens. The sky is clear and sprinkled with countless stars. In an age before any artificial light, the stars are astonishingly bright on a clear night. The band of the Milky Way arches overhead, and familiar constellations stand out sharply from the little doorway of the hut. If you stepped outside, you would see them glittering like 1,000 tiny lanterns in the sky. The peasants believe the stars are fixed in a great celestial dome above, part of God's creation that proclaims His glory each night. They might not know the science, but they know the comfort of those stars' regular appearance, marking seasons and lighting travelers' ways. Inside the hut, the family prepares for bed. There is no separate bedroom. They will all sleep in this one common room on their simple beds. The father stirs the fire once more. Banking it, he covers the glowing embers with ashes to keep them alive through the night without burning too hot. This way, come morning, he can revive the fire more easily. Wood is precious, and they cannot afford to let it burn needlessly. The mother helps the little ones settle down. The beds are simple, straw or hay mattresses on the floor or on low wooden frames if they have them, with perhaps old blankets or tattered furs for covering. The straw is bundled in rough hemp sacks to keep it together. It's not very soft and it harbors insects, but it's what they have. The children curl up together on one pallet for warmth. The parents share another pallet. Tonight is a bit chilly, so everyone keeps on most of their clothes as they sleep, removing only outer layers and belts. They have few if any changes of garments anyway, and laundering is laborious, so everyday clothes double as sleepwear often. As they settle into the straw and wool bedding, they might absently scratch at bites from fleas that live in the thatch and bedding. Fleas and lice are simply part of life here. Nearly everyone is pestered by them, no matter how often they shake out their blankets. True bathing is a rarity. They wash their faces and hands when they can, but a full immersion bath might happen only once in a great while, perhaps on a warm summer day in the stream or as preparation for an important festival. Generally, they carry a layer of dirt and sweat from the day's labors, and their clothes remain only lightly washed. A smoky fire and lack of soap mean a certain sour odor clings to everything. But none of this is remarkable to them. It is the common state of affairs for all their neighbors too. A bit of itching or a whiff of sweat is hardly noticed when it's universal. Fatigue soon overrides such minor discomforts. Before sleeping, they say a prayer. Perhaps they all kneel together for a moment on the hard-packed earth floor, hands clasped, and recite a familiar prayer like the Our Father, or a simple petition in their own words, asking for a peaceful night and protection from evil. The mother makes the sign of the cross over each child's forehead. The priest has taught them that dusk is a vulnerable time, when spirits or devils might trouble those without God's shield. So they make sure to invoke Christ and the saints to watch over their humble home. This done, they all murmur Amen. The little girl is already half asleep, whispering the last syllable. The boy lies down and closes his eyes, still smiling faintly, thinking of the story his father told. In the darkness, the parents lie close together. The father's arm is around his wife. They exchange a few soft words, perhaps reflecting on the day. The field was ploughed and the fence mended. No one got hurt, thank God. The mother quietly mentions that the neighbor's wife is expecting another baby in the summer. The father hums in acknowledgement, understanding both the joy and the worry of that news. They know childbirth can be dangerous, and another child is both a blessing and an added mouth to feed for that family. They agree to help them when the time comes, if needed. In a village like this, everyone helps to care for each other's children to some extent, and women will assist the midwife or the laboring mother. The father then mentions he heard the Lord Steward will be coming next week to hold court. The mother sighs, hoping they have done nothing that could bring a fine. Perhaps she brewed a bit more ale than allowed, but she doesn't think anyone noticed. They fall silent, listening to the soft crackle of the banked fire and the breathing of their children. They are exhausted. The father's last waking thought might be that tomorrow he'll yoke the oxen early to finish harrowing the south field. The mother's might be a mental note to patch her son's shoes before they fall apart completely. But these thoughts grow fuzzy as sleep takes over. As they drift off, one of them murmurs a final drowsy devotion. Lord, watch over us this night. Their voices trail into quiet. Outside, the wind has calmed. Only the faint sound of an owl hooting from the church steeple breaks the stillness. One by one, lights in the village have gone out. The world shrinks to the glow of the embers inside each hut. If you could peer in, you'd see our family huddled together on their straw pallets, the father's arm around his wife, the children tucked in beside them. They sleep close to the warmth of the fire pit, and the room is filled with the gentle sounds of their breathing. In sleep, the lines of worry on the father's brow smooth out. The mother's face, lit by a soft orange glow, looks young and peaceful. The little girl stirs and curls against her brother, who throws a small arm over her protectively, without waking. They have made it through another day of work and duty, and now they surrender to rest as the night watches over them. Now that we've walked through a typical day with its toil and humble comforts, let's step back and look at the larger picture of life for these medieval peasants. The cycle of their days repeats with the rhythm of the seasons. Each season brings its own labors and challenges, shaping the pattern of peasant life in a continuous loop that only slowly changes over generations. Spring is a time of intense work and also of hunger. Fields must be ploughed and sown in spring. The teams of oxen are out as soon as the ground is soft enough after winter's freeze. Peasants, like our family, labor to plant barley, oats, peas and lentils early and wheat a bit later. The entire village's well-being depends on these seeds taking root. It's also a lean season because winter stores are nearly depleted. This period is often called the hungry gap, the time when last year's grain is almost gone, but the new harvest is still months away. Many peasant families tighten their belts during spring, reducing their meals. They might gather wild greens and herbs to add to their pottage, stretching what little grain remains. Some have to eat seed grain that they ideally should save for sowing, a desperate measure that can jeopardize the harvest to stave off immediate starvation. In the worst years, spring hunger leads to weakness and disease. But when spring finally brings green shoots and the first lambs or calves are born, there's a sense of renewal and cautious hope. Summer is a period of both toil and plenty. Through late spring and summer, crops grow and animals graze. There is slightly less urgent field work after planting until the hay harvest, so peasants use this time for other tasks. Repairing buildings. Summer is ideal for re-thatching roofs or fixing the cottage daub that cracked in winter. Weeding the fields, shearing sheep in early summer and processing wool, and cutting timber under the Lord's license for building or fuel. They also cut hay in June or July, mowing meadows to gather hay for feeding livestock over winter. Haymaking is laborious but somewhat merry. Men, women and older children all go to the meadows with scythes and sickles, cutting long grass, letting it dry and then piling it onto carts to store in haylofts. The first fresh foods become available in summer. Milk is more abundant as animals graze on lush grass, so there's butter and cheese. Gardens yield vegetables like peas, beans and leafy greens. Forests offer berries. The peasant diet improves for a time. Village life sees a few celebrations in summer as well. In early May, as we touched on, they celebrate May Day, gathering blossoms and greenery, dancing around a maypole with laughter. It's a brief time of fun when the heaviness of life lifts a little. Come high summer, perhaps around Midsummer's Day, St. John's Day, in late June, there might be another simple festivity, lighting a bonfire at night on the hill, a tradition to ward off evil spirits and protect the crops. The young people jump through the flames for good luck, and everyone enjoys music and camaraderie under the warm summer stars. These folkloric customs are officially frowned on by some strict clergy, but they persist as beloved community traditions that add cheer to their lives. Summer is also the season when the traveling world brushes the village. Traders and peddlers move along the roads in good weather. Once or twice a year, a fair is held in a nearby town, and some peasants may go if granted permission or if they can sneak away. For instance, perhaps once a year there is a great fair in a nearby market town. Our peasant father might decide to go, bringing along his eldest son for help and curiosity. They wake before dawn and walk several miles on dusty roads until the wooden town gates and the sound of bustle come into view. Entering the fairground, the boy's eyes widen at the sights and sounds. Stalls lined with goods of all kinds and merchants hawking their wares. There are bright cloths from distant weavers, iron tools and pots, and even exotic spices giving off tantalizing aromas. Jugglers and minstrels roam, performing tricks and music to entertain the crowds. The father finds the livestock section where he might sell a spare piglet or a few wool fleeces his family can do without, bargaining with a trader for a fair price. After selling their goods, they have a few precious coins in hand. The father buys what the family needs, perhaps an iron axe head to replace a broken one or a sturdier second-hand cooking pot. And if he can spare it, he treats his son to a little something special, maybe a honey cake dripping with sweetness or a cup of spiced wine diluted with water. The boy savors the rare treat, the rich sweetness and unfamiliar spice, a marvel compared to the plain fare at home. They wander a bit more, marveling at a puppet show where painted wooden figures act out a comic folktale, drawing laughter from adults and children alike. They see a trained bear lumbering to the commands of a showman and marvel at a tumbler flipping through the air. As the sun starts to sink, they leave the noisy, colourful fair and head back on the long road to the village, tired but exhilarated. For weeks after, the son excitedly recounts to his siblings and mother all he saw: the brightly dressed merchants, the clever puppets, the taste of that honey cake, the knight he glimpsed riding through town on a huge horse, the jugglers tossing knives. The fair has given them not only useful items but also stories and memories, a glimpse of a larger world beyond their fields. Events like these shine brightly in the peasants' minds, a break from routine and a source of wonder that can be relived in retellings by the hearth on long evenings. Then comes autumn, the main harvest season, the climax of the agricultural year. All the hopes and labour of the past months become grain and vegetables to be gathered in. It's an incredibly busy and anxious time, starting in late summer with grains and extending through autumn with different crops. The whole community is engaged in harvesting. They reap wheat, rye, oats, barley. They gather peas and beans. They pick whatever garden produce they have, cabbages, onions, root vegetables. There is also fruit to collect, apples, pears, berries from hedges, grapes in those regions lucky enough to have vineyards. Our village might not, but some might gather wild grapes or plums. Everyone works from the first light of dawn until it is too dark to see. In those days, there are no tractors or artificial lights. Harvest must be completed by human hands and the grace of the sun. They form reaping teams and move methodically. Men often swinging scythes or sickles in front, women and children following behind to gather and bind the stalks into sheaves. The work is back-breaking, bending and cutting and carrying heavy bundles under the late summer sun, which can be quite hot, but it's also the time when the community's spirit shines. They sing harvest songs to keep rhythm and lighten the mood. They help each other without complaint because everyone's survival depends on the harvest. Even the older or infirm villagers contribute by watching small children or preparing meals in the field, perhaps bringing out a bit of ale and bread for the hungry reapers. After the grain is cut, it must be threshed to separate the kernels from the chaff. This often continues into late autumn and winter on the barn floors. Two people will swing flails, wooden staffs with hinged swingle, to beat the dried sheaves, knocking out the grains. It raises dust and blistered palms. It's monotonous but necessary. Winnowing follows, tossing the mixture so the breeze carries away the lighter chaff, leaving grains behind. By the end of it all, they have sacks of precious grain that will become their bread and pottage for the year, and the Lord's large share, of course. At last, when the crops are in, there is often a celebration called Harvest Home. Sometimes the peasants are allowed a bit of a feast. They might save the last sheaf of grain as a corn dolly, or Harvest Queen, a token woven into a little figure and kept till spring as a good luck charm. The lord of the manor, or his steward, might provide a celebratory ale or some food as thanks for bringing in his harvest. Perhaps one evening, after the grain is in the barns, the lord's brewster delivers a barrel of ale to the village green, and the steward allows the peasants to roast a sheep or pig that was part of their due. Everyone gathers to eat and drink, tired but happy that the harvest has been gathered safely. By the light of a bonfire, they might even dance, simple circle dances to the sound of a fiddle or pipe. There is laughter, maybe some good-natured teasing, and heartfelt gratitude in their toasts. They know how fortunate they are. If the weather was kind and the yield good, A successful harvest means the difference between enough bread or months of gnawing hunger. So that night, under the autumn stars, they celebrate as a community. Even the steward may raise a cup in fellowship, because a good harvest benefits all. Then winter comes. Winter in the medieval village is a time of cold and darkness, and often hunger and illness. Work does not cease, but it changes in character. The fields are mostly bare or dormant. Instead of ploughing and harvesting, the peasants turn to other tasks and try to endure the harsh conditions. During the bleak months of January and February, daily life is quieter, but still demands effort. The fields lie fallow under frost or snow, but inside the cottages there is much to do. Men turn to tasks of maintenance, repairing the wooden plough with fresh pegs, mending harnesses for the oxen with strips of leather, twisting straw into new ropes, or patching the wattle and daub walls of the house where cracks have appeared. Women continue their endless work with textiles. Spinning doesn't stop for winter, and if they have a loom or can access one, winter is the time to weave the yarn spun all year into cloth for garments or blankets. In the dim light by the hearth, the mother might be bent over a length of homespun woolen fabric, patiently hand sewing a new tunic for her growing son from the rough cloth she wove. Children, when not helping with small chores, play quietly indoors, perhaps using little carved wooden dolls or knuckle bones from the holiday's slaughtered pig as toys, or inventing games with bits of wood and string. Outdoors, the village is often hushed. The bare trees rattle in the cold wind. Smoke rises straight from the cottage roofs into the still, grey sky. Now and then, a villager must venture out, leading the cow to water at the icy stream or gathering a basket of whatever fuel can be found. Firewood is precious, and by midwinter, many have burned through their store gathered in autumn. Some scour the woodland edges for dead branches on milder days, or dig up peat from the bog if the village has peat rights to dry and burn. Others resort to burning dried dung collected from the byre and moulded into patties, or spare thatch from roof repairs to keep the fire going. The houses are smoky and dim. Without proper chimneys, the hearth smoke hangs in the rafters and coats everything in soot. One small upside, the smoke helps cure any meat hung up there, and perhaps keeps fleas from multiplying too quickly. On winter evenings, families huddle close to the fire for warmth. They share stories or songs to pass the long, dark hours. A grandmother might recall winters of her youth, telling of the year when snow fell so deep it buried the fences, or the winter when wolves came prowling closer than anyone could remember, their howls echoing from the frozen woods. How the villagers gathered in one hut with torches through the night until the wolves went away. The children listened wide-eyed to these tales of hardship and courage, bundled in whatever furs or patched blankets the family has. Outside, the wind might howl and scrape at the door, but inside, as long as the fire holds, there is a small island of light and warmth. Sometimes neighbors join together in one cottage, several families crowding in to share the warmth and company, especially if one house has a larger hearth or more fuel left. They sip weak ale warmed by the fire, or perhaps a hot broth, and they give thanks that they have shelter on such a night. Winter is also the season of storytelling and occasional festivity amid the hardship. Back in November at Martinmas, they slaughtered any animals they couldn't feed through winter. The meat was salted heavily or smoked to preserve it. By midwinter, some of that pork or beef is well cured and can be used sparingly for a celebratory meal. The highlight of winter is Christmas. And so, on Christmas Eve, the entire village gathers in the little church for midnight mass, braving the cold darkness with lanterns in hand. Inside the chapel, the air is icy but filled with the warmth of candlelight. Dozens of small flames flicker along the altar and in iron sconces on the walls, illuminating the stone interior with a gentle golden glow. The familiar scent of incense wafts through the nave as the priest leads the congregation in ancient carols and hymns. The words are Latin, but the peasants know the tunes by heart from yearly repetition, and they hum or sing softly along, their breath visible in the chilly air. Children fight off drowsiness, eyes shining at the splendor of so many candles and the soft echoes of song in the wooden rafters. When the bells chime midnight, announcing Christmas Day, a feeling of peace and joy spreads among the villagers. They exchange smiles, some have tears of happiness in their eyes. The priest delivers a brief sermon about the birth of Jesus in a humble stable, an image that resonates deeply with these poor families in their own humble homes. He then raises his hands in blessing and wishes them all a holy and happy Christmas, encouraging them to keep the spirit of goodwill. He ends the Mass with Pax Vobiscum, peace be with you, and the people reply with a sincere et cum spiritu tuo, and with your spirit. After Mass, the villagers linger outside despite the biting cold. They embrace, clapping each other on the shoulders, murmuring God bless you and Merry Christmas in their own tongue. The stars above are brilliant on this clear winter midnight, sparkling in a sky as black as velvet. For a moment, standing together in the snow-covered churchyard, they feel a profound sense of unity and hope. Even the poorest among them, for this moment, feels blessed. The Saviour was born poor like them, and tonight that thought comforts their souls. Then, one by one, they shuffle home to snatch a few hours of sleep before the Christmas morning feast. On Christmas Day, work is put aside as much as possible. In every hut, the best food that can be saved is brought out. Perhaps the lord of the manor has sent down some special provisions. It's not uncommon for a lord to distribute a bit of charity on Christmas, maybe a cask of ale or some fresh white bread or meat as a sign of goodwill, and to ensure his labourers are fed for the coming work. Families might have a bit of that salted pork or bacon reserved for this day, or special treats like dried apples and nuts gathered in autumn. They make a richer pottage than usual, maybe adding some meat and more barley than they would on a normal day. They bake bread if they have enough flour to spare. Some even splurge to make a small loaf of fine wheaten bread for Christmas, if they acquired any wheat flour, since normally they eat rye or barley bread. Neighbours visit each other, carrying simple gifts. One might bring over a small jar of honey if they keep bees, another a flask of homemade cider or wine, another perhaps a few bright winter apples from the manor orchard, given to him for service. They share these things around. In our family's home, the children are wide-eyed with excitement to taste rare sweets. Their mother managed to save a little honey and some spices that the priest gave her, and she baked a honey cake flavoured with ginger for Christmas. Imagine their delight biting into something sweet and spicy after a year of bland foods. There is laughter and even a bit of music on Christmas Day. One young man down the lane has a homemade flute, and he goes door to door playing cheerful tunes. When he arrives at our family's hut, they invite him to sit by the fire and have a cup of warm, spiced ale, heated with a poker from the fire and sprinkled with cinnamon, just a pinch that the mother had from the priest's gift. In return, he plays a lively ditty on his flute. The children clap along, and the mother even stands up and dances a few steps with her little daughter in her arms, making everyone laugh. The father taps his foot and beams at seeing his family momentarily carefree. The day is filled with a sense of lightness that is often absent. No one is scolding about chores or out in the frozen fields. For these few hours, they allow themselves to be simply joyful. After eating their fill, a rare pleasure to feel full, many villagers step out into the crisp afternoon and visit neighbours. They wander the village, greeting those they meet with smiles, perhaps exchanging small tokens or simply heartfelt wishes. They might gather again in the evening for communal merriment, possibly a warm fire in the open, around which they tell stories or sing a few songs honouring the Christmastide. The children play games like tag or blind man's buff in the twilight, their laughter ringing out. Amid the bleak winter, these days are like a bright fire, warming their hearts. The Christmas season continues in some measure until 12th night, Epiphany, January 6th. Throughout these 12 days, there is an atmosphere of relative leisure. The manor typically does not demand its usual labour during the core of Christmastide, except for basic chores. People savour this brief respite. On the final night, Epiphany Eve, the village might have one more modest celebration, perhaps a communal meal in the manor barn, or a special brew shared around to mark the end of the holidays. They might bless their homes with chalk or carry the last bit of the Yule log's charred wood as a protective talisman until next year. After Epiphany, life returns to the normal grind of work and worry. But those holiday memories of rare treats, of singing and dancing, of warmth and friendship amid the cold will be sustenance for their spirits in the coming months. On many a long winter evening afterward, they will talk about the fun and goodwill they shared, and that will brighten the dark nights. The cycle of the year thus turns full circle. Spring work, summer toil and small pleasures, autumn harvest, winter hardship and brief joy at Christmas, then back to spring. Year after year, our peasant family lives this cycle, as did their forefathers and as they assume will their children after them. Change comes slowly in such a world, almost imperceptibly over generations, yet by the early 14th century, things are subtly different from a century before, and by the late 14th century more changes will come. History, as we know looking back, has surprises in store for these people. For instance, in the year 1315, a terrible crisis would strike much of Europe, the Great Famine. Unprecedented heavy rains fell for months on end, ruining crops for multiple seasons. About 5 to 10% of the population in affected regions starved to death or died of illnesses related to malnutrition. If our village lay in the path of this disaster, the year 1316 would have been one of unimaginable suffering. People ate whatever they could find, cats, dogs, even roots and bark from trees. There are accounts from that time of extreme desperation, prisoners left to starve in jails, parents sometimes abandoning children they could no longer feed, and rumors of cannibalism on the fringes of civilization. In a village like ours, we can imagine how grim it would have been. The family's grain store empty by Christmas, no new seed to plant in spring, the cow dead because there was no hay, neighbors dying one by one through the winter and spring. Perhaps the only relief came when finally, after 2 or 3 dreadful years, the weather pattern changed and a decent harvest grew again. But those who survived would never forget how fragile their lives truly were. This famine taught hard lessons and destabilized the old order in subtle ways, weakening the bonds of obligation as everyone was driven to basic survival mode. A few decades after the famine, another calamity struck, the Black Death, the Great Plague of Fursery 471350, which swept through Europe and killed an enormous portion of the population. In some places, 1/3 to 1/2 of the people perished. Although our story has been set around early 1300, we know historically that by late 1348, plague would strike villages much like this one. Perhaps one autumn, a distant rumor comes of a pestilence moving inland from the ports. Then one day, it arrives in the nearest town and creeps into the countryside. People fall sick with frightening swiftness, high fevers, delirium, and swollen lymph nodes, bulb nodes that turn black. In our village, maybe the first to die is the miller's wife, who had been to market and came back coughing. Soon, others take ill. The peasants are terrified. They don't understand disease transmission, but they know it's deadly. They may attribute it to God's wrath, or a bad air, or a curse. However they explain it, they can do little. The sick either recover or die within days. Families hide in their homes. Their fleas on rats carry the invisible plague bacillus, even through shut doors. One by one, people succumb. We can imagine the absolute despair, the mother of our family praying over a feverish child and watching him pass away. The father digging graves when there's hardly strength to dig. The priest striding bravely from house to house to administer last rites until he too collapses. A village of 50 might find only 20 left alive after the worst wave passes. Bodies have to be buried quickly. Sometimes, a pit is dug for multiple corpses. The survivors are in shock, mourning their loved ones while also fearing who might be next. But after the Black Death's first wave burns through, those who survive find a changed world. With labor now scarce, the peasants suddenly have some leverage. In many parts of Western Europe, in the decades following the plague, peasants began demanding better terms, higher wages for laborers, or commutation of labor service to cash rent for serfs. The nobility tried to resist these changes. Laws like the Ordinance of Labourers of 1349 and the Statute of Labourers of 1351 in England attempted to freeze wages and tie workers to their land. But enforcement was spotty, and ultimately the shortage of manpower gave common folk more bargaining power than they'd ever had. Serfdom slowly weakened in Western Europe after the Black Death. Many serfs found paths to freedom. Some simply walked away to cities where labour was needed. Others saved enough to buy their freedom. Others negotiated with lords who were desperate to have their estates cultivated. Over the next century or two, feudal bonds in places like England, France, and parts of Italy largely transformed into tenancy with fixed rents or freehold farms. By the 1400s, a peasant in England might no longer owe any labour to the lord, just a rent in cash or kind, and could not be arbitrarily forced to stay if he could find a better life elsewhere. In short, the later medieval period saw the very slow dawn of a more free peasantry in the West. Even in the short term after the plague, survivors might find themselves suddenly owning a bit more land, inheriting from dead relatives or neighbours, and for a while enjoying better diets and higher real wages due to less competition for resources. Some historians call it a golden age of the peasantry, though that may be overstating it. Life was still hard, but there were gains for the common folk. However, in Eastern Europe, by contrast, nobles actually tightened their grip after the 14th century, and serfdom grew harsher through the 15th and 16th centuries. But that's another story, far from our little village. Sometimes peasants even pushed back with open rebellion. In England in 1381, about a generation after the Black Death, there was the famous Peasants' Revolt. Tens of thousands of peasants and townsfolk rose up under leaders like Wat Tyler and the preacher John Ball, marching on London to demand an end to serfdom, lower taxes and greater freedom. For a brief moment, commoners shook the kingdom's foundations. They even stormed the Tower of London and executed some royal officials who were despised. They believed God intended men to be equal. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? John Ball reportedly asked, pointing out that nobility is a human invention. Our villagers folk might have heard of this revolt with astonishment. Perhaps one or two bolder young men ran off to join it, caught up in the hope of change. But the revolt was ultimately crushed. The young King Richard II tricked the rebels with false promises, and then the royal forces suppressed them, executing leaders and participants brutally. The immediate demands were denied, yet over the longer term, serfdom continued to wither in England. Gone by the 15th century, not because of violence, but due to economic forces and persistent quiet resistance. In France too, there were uprisings like the Jacquerie of 1358. Similarly, peasants violently vented their anger at noble oppression, but were put down with terrible vengeance. Those times of overt rebellion were rare. The common strategy was endurance and small everyday acts of defiance, as we have seen. Despite the occasional turmoil, through all the plague and famine and war, peasant life in essence remained bound to the soil and the seasons. Upheavals came and went, yet the ploughing and sowing had to continue. The great wheel of life turned much the same for those who survived, though bit by bit some conditions improved. By the late Middle Ages, a peasant in Western Europe had a somewhat better chance of not being tied to one lord for life and might earn wages for some work. Towns were growing, offering alternatives to rural servitude. If a serf could endure a year and a day in a chartered town without being caught, he was legally free. Town air makes free was the saying. Some peasants' children did run away to towns to become apprentices in trades or to try their luck as servants or day labourers. Some succeeded, many probably ended up just as poor in a different setting, but the possibility of social mobility, however slim, was creeping in. A very bright peasant boy might be noticed by a parish priest and sent to school at a monastery. A rare path, but a few did rise to become clergymen or scholars. For the vast majority, though, such dreams remained out of reach. A peasant born in a village would likely die in that village, having lived roughly the same kind of life as his father and grandfather, barring catastrophes. Nobles and clergy often looked down upon the peasantry. Nobles saw them as crude, almost like another species put on earth to toil. There was a common adage comparing a peasant to a stubborn animal. Many lords, though they relied entirely on peasant labor for their wealth, had little empathy for their tenants' sufferings. They might call them Jacques or vilain, meaning serf, as a dismissive term. In fact, our modern word villain originally just meant a peasant from a villa estate, but it took on the connotation of someone base or evil, reflecting aristocratic prejudices. The clergy had mixed views. The local parish priest might love his flock and praise their honest work, but higher clergy and moralists sometimes scorned peasants as well, calling them ignorant, superstitious, and in need of firm guidance. They certainly needed guidance in the church's eyes. Many peasants held on to old folk beliefs and were not well versed in Christian doctrine beyond the basics. The church tried to provide structure and comfort to them, teaching that every person has his God-given place. The nobles to rule and fight, the clergy to pray, and the peasants, those who work, to till and labor. This was often preached as the natural order, and for the most part, peasants accepted it, or at least did not openly contest it. After all, challenging the system usually brought swift and harsh retribution. And the idea of an alternative society was beyond most people's imagination at the time. Yet while submissive in public, the peasantry maintained an inner resilience and subtle forms of resistance. We've seen how they might cheat a little on their obligations, using a hand mill in secret, gathering an extra bundle of firewood from the Lord's forest and hoping no one notices, or poaching a rabbit to feed a hungry family. These quiet acts of defiance, or simply practical attempts to survive, took place in the shadows. Everyone in the village understood why one would do it. Necessity often left no choice. If caught, a peasant would beg that hunger or cold drove them to it. Sometimes officials looked the other way for minor things. They were human too, and knew that there but for the grace of God go I. Other times, especially if the Lord was greedy or the bailiff cruel, even small infractions were punished. It was a delicate dance. Bend the rules just enough to get by, but not so much as to provoke the Lord's wrath. Over years and decades, these small acts accumulated and probably contributed to the gradual erosion of the strictest forms of serfdom, as lords found it easier to grant concessions, like accepting a small rent instead of enforcing labor duties, than to constantly police and punish reluctant peasants. In that way, the peasants quietly bargained with their lords through their actions, a form of unspoken negotiation born out of everyday resistance. The world of our medieval peasants was on the surface static and changeless. Their horizons were literally bounded by how far they could walk in a day. Most would rarely travel more than a few miles from home in their lifetime, except perhaps to go on pilgrimage or to flee disaster. They were tied to one spot, both by law and by the sheer demands of subsistence farming. And yet, in the long view, their world was slowly changing around them. By the end of the Middle Ages, say the 15th century, money was increasingly circulating. Feudal lords were becoming more like landlords than masters, and some peasants were effectively small-scale farmers with long-term leases or even ownership of their plots. A class of more prosperous peasants emerged in some areas, sometimes called yeomen in England, farmers who had enough land to be comfortable, perhaps even hire labourers themselves. On the flip side, population growth later in the 16th century would press many back into land hunger and poverty, but that's beyond our scope. The seeds of change, wage labour, free movement, market economy, was sprouting beneath the snow of the old order, so to speak. But our story is focused on those hard medieval centuries, when indeed being a peasant was full of suffering and limitations. Today, some people might romanticize the medieval peasant's life as a simple life, in tune with nature, picturing cozy cottages and merry village dances. We did see that there were small joys and communal celebrations. Yet we cannot overlook that this simplicity was not a gentle pastoral retreat. It was an existence racked with physical exhaustion, material scarcity, and vulnerability to nature and authority. Modern people sometimes imagine smiling peasants cheerfully tilling fields and enjoying hearty rustic feasts each night. The reality, preserved in manorial rolls, wills, and chronicles, shows otherwise. Life was a grind of labor from childhood until death, with little security. The natural beauty of the landscape came hand in hand with natural dangers. A beautiful sunny growing season might be followed by a cruel winter famine. The good old days were often brutally short and painful. The average life expectancy at birth was low, perhaps in the 30 says, dragged down by high child mortality. If one survived childhood, they might live into their 50s or 60s says. But by then, a peasant's body was worn out by labor. Many women died in childbirth or from related infections. Injuries could easily become fatal without proper care. An infected cut from a sickle or a crushed limb under a wagon could end a life or leave one crippled. And there was no insurance or formal charity beyond what the village or church might provide. But it would be wrong to think their lives were nothing but misery. Humans are adaptable. Within their hardships, medieval peasants found ways to be content, to laugh, to love, and to look forward to tomorrow. They had a strong sense of community, in many ways far stronger than what we know in modern individualistic society. They lived in each other's pockets, dozens of people who all knew each other's families intimately, who saw each other every day at the well, in the fields, at church. They celebrated together at weddings and wept together at funerals. If a barn burned down, the village pitched in to rebuild it. The Lord might supply some timber, but the neighbors provided labor and spare thatch. If someone was ill, a neighbor would come by to help feed the animals or tend the children. The concept of being alone was rare. They had their share of squabbles and feuds, certainly. People are people, after all. But they also had a fundamental reliance on each other. They shared tools. They traded labor. You help me plow my strip, I'll help you bring in your hay. And they looked out for each other in crises because it was necessary for survival. This bred a sort of collective endurance, an understanding that they stood or fell together. We saw glimpses of small joys. Let's highlight them clearly. A small joy was having a full belly the night after harvest, sitting by the fire while autumn winds raged outside, knowing the granary was stocked. That was a joy laced with relief. Or hearing your child laugh over a little wooden toy you carved. That must have warmed a medieval parent's heart no less than it would today. Joining in dance on a mild May evening, wearing garlands of wildflowers, flirting and joking, those moments brought lightness and courtship into lives that otherwise had little privacy or romance. The taste of the first ripe apples of the season, the smell of freshly baked bread after weeks of eating thin gruel, the comfort of a wool cloak around your shoulders on a frosty morning, the sound of the church bell on a holy day promising a few hours of rest. These were real, tangible consolations amidst the drudgery. And spiritual faith, of course, was a tremendous source of solace, believing that all their suffering had a purpose in God's plan, that beyond this life lay heaven where every tear shall be wiped away, gave peasants a framework to cope with loss and injustice. It wasn't just imposed on them by the church. Many truly internalized it and found strength in it. We might marvel at how such devout belief persisted, but when life itself offers few guarantees, the promise of divine justice and eternal rest can be incredibly sustaining. As the medieval period drew to a close, peasants' conditions did slowly begin to improve in some regions. By the 15th century, as noted, Western European peasants were often either free or on the way to being free, paying rents rather than labor, and sometimes even choosing whom to work for. Some became relatively prosperous farmers. Education spread a little. For instance, village churches sometimes had schools for a few boys. New technologies and practices emerged too. Heavy plows improved agriculture on clay soils earlier on. The three-field crop rotation, already used in many places by 1300, helped increase yields slightly. And later, things like water mills and windmills multiplied to ease the burden of grinding grain or sawing wood. There were also social changes. A peasant's lot in 1500 was not quite the same as in 1200. In England, for example, many were now copyholders, holding land according to a written copy of the manor roll, which gave them more legal security, and the idea of serfdom had become almost archaic. In parts of France, many serfs had redeemed their obligations, or the practice had faded after the turmoil of the 14th century. However, in Central and Eastern Europe, nobility doubled down on keeping peasants bound, a division in Europe's trajectory that would last into the 19th century. Zooming back to our village, imagine now it is a generation or two later. Perhaps our original family's grandchildren are now running the household. It may be around 1400. They speak the same dialect, farm the same land, attend the same little church, but they've heard from their elders about the terrible plague years. Many old families in the village died out then, new ones came in to take over abandoned holdings. The village might even have a shrine by the road commemorating those lost, or just memories held in prayer. Things are a bit better now in some ways. There is more land per capita because there are fewer people alive, so no one is as destitute as before, at least for a while until population grows again. Wages for hired labor, say helping at the manor or in a town, are higher. Sometimes the steward actually pays people to work the Lord's demes because there aren't enough serfs. So a clever peasant might earn a few extra coins in the slow winter by doing wage work like carting goods or chopping extra firewood for the manor. Our family's grandchildren might own a second cow now, or have been able to build a better house with an extra room because timber was more available with less competition. They might be less bound to the soil. Perhaps they are technically free tenants now. Their diet could be slightly more varied. Some evidence suggests that after the plague, surviving peasants ate more meat for a time because there were many unattended pigs and cattle roaming, fewer people to consume them initially, and grain was cheaper. But new struggles will come later in the 15th century, war, new taxes, etc. And yet, through all changes, one thing remained constant for medieval peasants: the need to work hard simply to survive, and the importance of community and belief in getting through the grind of life. Our peasant family's story, while specific, reflects countless others. The great cathedrals and castles of the Middle Ages were built on the grain and taxes produced by these humble workers of the soil. Those splendid knights in shining armor who populate our tales of the Middle Ages were fed, clothed, and equipped, ultimately by the labor of men and women bent over in the fields, year after year. The chroniclers in monasteries rarely mentioned peasants, except when they revolted or when their deaths from famine or plague were tallied as statistics. Yet it was the peasantry that underpinned everything. They were 80-90% of the population. Without them, medieval society would literally have collapsed. In the end, what can we say of why it sucked to be a medieval peasant? By now, you likely have a profound sense of it. The work was ceaseless and physically punishing. The rewards meager. A peasant had almost no control over their destiny, bound by obligations to a lord, vulnerable to the whims of weather, prone to exploitation, lacking rights or voice in the larger world. They endured frequent hunger, lived in what we would consider filth and discomfort, lost many children to early deaths, and could be beaten or punished at the Lord's will for transgressions that might seem trivial, like gathering a few sticks in the Lord's forest. Social mobility was virtually non-existent for them. A saying of the time was, "A villain you are, and a villain you shall continue," meaning, if you're born a serf, you'll die a serf. Education was out of reach. They could not read or write their own name, generally. They were often at the mercy of soldiers or bandits if war swept through. An invading army or rout of mercenaries might burn their village, rape or kill them, take everything and move on, leaving the survivors to start from ashes. It's little wonder that for centuries, being a peasant was almost synonymous with suffering to the educated observers who nonetheless relied on them heavily. And yet, amid all that hardship, there was a quiet dignity in how peasants lived. They labored and loved. They raised children and passed on knowledge of how to grow food in a fickle climate. They laughed at the little absurdities of life. I'm sure jokes were made about greedy lords and lazy priests around cottage fires, even if we have no record of them. They maintained a connection to the earth and the turning seasons that perhaps gave their life a kind of rhythm and meaning we can easily forget in modern times. In working the land, they were part of an ancient tradition stretching back thousands of years. Their skills, knowing when to sow, how to thatch a roof, how to mend a shoe, how to tend a birthing cow, were practical wisdom passed parent to child, part of the great chain of human survival. Now, the night in our story village grows deep. All that can be heard is the winter wind outside, and maybe the distant bark of a farm dog. Our peasant family sleeps close, resting their weary bodies. They don't know what the future holds. Tomorrow will likely be another day of early rising, long work, small triumphs, and small trials. Maybe tomorrow the father will finish ploughing that last field and feel a satisfaction in accomplishing that before the next rain. Maybe the mother will barter a bit of her spun yarn with a neighbor in exchange for a few eggs to surprise the children. Maybe the little boy will find a bird's nest with an egg and be delighted at the discovery. Right? Life is composed of these little moments. Their world is narrow, but within it they experience the full range of human emotion. Love for family, fear of loss, pride in a good harvest, frustration with unfairness, contentment after a good meal, sorrow at a neighbor's funeral, amusement at a child's silly play. Human life, in all its richness, was present even in that lowly hut with its mud walls and straw floor. While the great lords and ladies danced in castles and the learned monks debated in monasteries, the peasants quietly continued keeping the world turning by growing the food and raising the livestock that fed all. They were largely voiceless and forgotten in the grand chronicles, but their perseverance was an undeniable force. As you picture this scene in your mind, the dark village with only a faint glow from hearths, the cold stars above, the simple folk asleep after a hard day, take a moment to appreciate how far we have come, and also how connected we still are to those people. The blood of peasants runs in most of our veins, if we trace back far enough. The comforts we enjoy today are built on the labor of countless unnamed workers through history. Now, I hope this slow journey through the past has gently stilled your own thoughts. We've walked with the medieval peasants in their fields and at their fireside, seen their toils and their rare celebrations. We've observed quietly, as if standing in the corner of their hut, an unseen guest sharing their humble supper. In doing so, perhaps the details and rhythms of that simpler, if much harder, life have lulled your mind into a calmer state. There is something soothing about imagining the crackling of the hearth, the cyclical certainty of seasons, even the steady effort of manual work, far removed from modern rush and stress. Our peasants have now long gone to their rest, not only this night but in the pages of history. Yet the image of their silent endurance, their communal life and small joys remains with us. It reminds us that humans can get through a great deal with hope and each other, and that even the humblest life has beauty in its persistence and solidarity. The night deepens, and so it's time for us too to rest. You've listened so patiently to this gentle recounting of distant days. Perhaps your eyes are closed and you've been picturing it all as in a dream. Let yourself now slip fully into sleep, carrying with you a sense of calm. The peasants of our story endured their hard lives one day at a time, often ending the day with simple prayers and gratitude for the small blessings they had. A roof, a loaf of bread, a family by their side. In that spirit, let go of any worries or complexities that trouble you. Right now, in this moment, you are safe, warm, and you have done enough for today. Close your eyes if they aren't closed already. Feel the weight of your body sinking into your bed as the peasant felt his body relax into the straw. Take a slow, deep breath, and another. Imagine the quiet of that medieval village night. No engines, no phones, just the soft wind and a distant owl. In your mind's eye, you two are in a small cottage, lying by a cozy fire, with the scent of wood smoke and warm earth around you. All the work is done, nothing more is asked of you right now. There is a gentle contentment in that scene. You can almost hear the crackle of embers and the soft breathing of loved ones asleep nearby. The world outside, in both past and present, can be harsh, but here, in this quiet moment, there is peace. The same stars that twinkled over the medieval peasant shine over you tonight, watching benevolently. The same dawn will come in time, bringing a new day, but until then, you have these hours to rest and restore yourself. You can let your thoughts drift now, like smoke dissipating into the night sky. If you still hear my voice, let it become a friendly murmur in the background of your mind, like the comfortable narration of a story half heard by a fireside as you nod off. You don't need to hold on to any detail or worry about remembering anything. All is well, and you can simply be. Feel the heaviness in your limbs as sleep gathers. Allow yourself to sink deeper into that warm drowsiness. Our journey to the past is done, and we leave our peasant family in their well-earned slumber. It's time now for you to join them in rest. Good night, sleep well, and sweet dreams. You are safe, you are warm, you can rest now. Good night.